Last night, my mother screamed at my brother, hinting she might disown him. It ended with my grandfather charging in, terrifying me. Conflict seems to occur almost every other day in our home. It varies from minor disagreements to the police being summoned, leading to us spending the night in a hotel. Admittedly, that situation only arose once last year, yet the point remains I have grown accustomed to this. This has been the reality for me since childhood, and it has persisted. However, these disputes generally do not escalate into screaming contests or physical confrontations. While such incidents have occurred multiple times, it is typically just raised voices at worst. My brother often comes into my room to vent, while my mother, occasionally intoxicated at 3 a.m., sings loudly to whatever music is playing. There are moments when her drunkenness leads to conversations with me that leave me feeling quite uncomfortable, though this is a rarity. That sort of venting is typically directed at my older sister. Usually, I assume the role of a background character. I typically refrain from taking sides, striving to ease tensions for whoever approaches me, which is often my brother. Still, I aim to maintain a certain degree of distance, ensuring that I remain on everyone's good side. I used to be deeply involved in these disputes, doing my utmost to intervene and stop them. However, I now realize that this pattern is unlikely to change, and they seldom heed my perspective. Nonetheless, last night was particularly troubling. While not the worst, it was still frightening. I, a 16-year-old female, was casually watching shows on my computer when I heard my mother rush upstairs, screaming at my brother, who is 17. I did not understand the context at that moment, but it was severe. She expressed that she was finished with him, condemning something he had texted about our grandmother as spiteful and not in accordance with Christian values. She also stated she did not want him living here once he turned 18, which felt akin to her disowning him, albeit not in those precise terms. It was genuinely distressing, ranking among the harshest things I have heard my mother direct toward us. My brother attempted to calm her down and lower her volume, though he did so in a somewhat condescending manner. Yet she did not relent and continued yelling before storming off. Then my brother came to my room in tears. I did my best to comfort him, assuring him that no matter his statements, our mother should not have said what she did. I attempted to validate his feelings. It was then that I read the texts he had sent, revealing he was essentially venting to our mother about our grandmother. She harbors an irrational hatred for my brother's girlfriend, refusing to allow her in our home and monitoring her closely whenever she does visit. What he wrote was indeed harsh, but to be honest, I agree with him to some extent. Our household typically accommodates our grandparents' desires, permitting them to treat us poorly while we are expected to be courteous and smile at them. We can only decompress later with our siblings. Of course, there are nuances to this dynamic, but that discussion can happen another time. Regardless, I tried to settle my brother, but he refused to calm down. We somehow ended up in our sister's room, which is larger and more spacious, like a second living room where we usually congregate. How we got there is a bit of a mystery. However, about 10 to 20 minutes later, our sister returned home from the store. I made sure to inform her about the ongoing situation so she wouldn't be caught off guard. She attempted to soothe him, but this is where matters became complicated. When in such distress, my brother struggles to think clearly. He can hear a multitude of criticisms concerning others but fixates solely on the one critique directed at him. Furthermore, our sister wasn't present to witness our mother's outburst. Even if she grasped the overall situation, her perspective might be skewed. She has a tendency to validate, offer criticism, and then validate again, though criticism is perhaps too harsh a word. While she wasn't saying anything factually incorrect, her words were not what was needed at that moment. Being exhausted, she, like me, is also weary of this incessant fighting. As the oldest sibling, she carries the heavier burden of mediating everything. She demonstrates more maturity than any of the adults, including our mother and grandparents. Overwhelmed and fatigued, she, too, eventually erupted, expressing her frustrations about the never-ending arguments, even labeling everyone my brother included as assholes. Remember what I mentioned about my brother being unable to hear criticism? He stood up and shouted in her face, declaring that perhaps he should just leave since he was such a terrible person. He slammed the door with such force that the frame broke, causing something hanging on it to fall. This is where things turned frightening. My grandfather, unable to contain himself, dashed upstairs to lecture my brother. The problem? Our grandfather is a diagnosed narcissist who despises my brother. Some of the animosity is deserved, but much is unwarranted. This mutual hatred is evident. I've heard my brother express extreme disdain for our grandfather, even wishing him dead. While I don't believe he would act on such thoughts, I have witnessed the anger on his face when he speaks of him. My instincts kicked in because if they did not separate, it would likely result in one of them, probably my grandfather, being harmed. They have engaged in physical confrontations in the past, and it is never pleasant. I took hold of my brother's hand, trying to lead him back to his room to close the door. I thought he might hit me. Though I know he wouldn't strike me intentionally, his intense anger often clouds his judgment. Fortunately, he did not, but he did shove me aside and open the door. They began screaming at each other once more. My sister was attempting to persuade our grandfather to leave. I realize this may not sound overly dramatic, and I have lived through far worse and more terrifying confrontations. My memory is a bit hazy at this point, but somehow, the situation led to my brother collapsing in tears on the bathroom floor while our grandfather departed. I'm uncertain how it unfolded. I retreated to my room and took 20 milligrams of melatonin. My mother returned upstairs, trying to help soothe my brother, and gradually, the atmosphere diffused. My sister and I chatted in her room until it felt less tense. As is often the case, after things calmed down a bit, my brother walked in seeking reassurance and comfort once again. The argument began around 9 p.m. and officially concluded around midnight. I don't know. I am simply so fatigued by this. There had been nothing significant happening that day. My brother merely felt inclined to vent about our grandmother, which I understand. It is normal to get stuck on memories associated with individuals regardless of whether anything specific transpired that day. As I mentioned earlier, I agree with him on certain points. However, unlike him, I recognize the complexities involved in our circumstances. Despite our mother's submissiveness and her limited capacity to shield us from our grandparents' behaviors, she faces constraints. Yes, I believe she could have taken additional steps. If she genuinely felt the need to relocate, she could have acted on it. We have lived with our grandparents since I was 7 years old. Now at 16, and with our mother being 40, that spans ample time to find a solution, particularly for the sake of her children who are trapped in this stressful environment. However, I also recognize that my mother is a victim of severe abuse herself. Since childhood, she has been conditioned to protect her mother. She used to pay bills without her mother's knowledge. It's hard to ignore the reality of my grandmother's influence on her. I can see it clearly. The only difference is that I rarely get to experience those good memories with her. I know she loves us, and a part of me cares for her as well. Yet, our mother grew up under our grandmother's control. I understand the feelings of attachment and entrapment. I strive not to resent her for forcing us to live in such close quarters with them. At times, as twisted as it may seem, I find myself wishing one of them would pass away. Their interactions seem to exacerbate each other's negative traits, igniting conflicts. It is disheartening. I'm 16 now, and I feel as if I've matured to a point where I can no longer blame my mother for failing to protect us. Now it feels as if no one is willing to assist us. I'm weary of this dynamic. Nearly all of the contention and chaos in this household stems from them. Our grandmother is the reason we ended up spending a night in a hotel and why the police had to intervene. She is also the reason my mother sat crying in a parking lot, yearning for change. That night, I felt so cold. I was too restless to remain in the car with the heat, so I ventured outside, clad only in pajamas and slippers. My slippers became soaked from the damp pavement as I ambled about, powerless while the police questioned us. A part of me felt pathetic, hoping they would intervene, yet the police have been called multiple times before without action. They simply ask us questions, produce reports, and occasionally provide resources that we will never utilize. Then, the following day, everything returns to normal. I am expected to smile, engage in conversation, and socialize with individuals who had been shouting, breaking things, and hurling insults at my brother the night before. I must be cordial with my mother, as if nothing had occurred, as if she hadn't uttered the most hurtful remarks to my brother based on a mix of true yet incomplete opinions. I am so exhausted by this. I've always managed to separate my grandparents from my immediate family. that is, my mother, brother, and sister. I can cope with conflicts involving or concerning my grandparents. However, lately, it feels as though the four of us are becoming distant, especially my brother and mother. Perhaps I am distancing myself too, to some degree, even though I am not as outspoken as my brother regarding my views. Generally speaking, I have a good life. I possess nice clothing, my own room, and access to food whenever I am hungry. I have a phone, tablet, iPad, and computer. I have a loving dog that my family acquired for me and a mischievous yet endearing cat. My family is kind to me most of the time, so the question remains, is this normal? I am unsure about the distinction between ordinary family troubles and a genuinely detrimental situation. This has been my reality for as long as I can remember. While last night was particularly intense, we have encountered scenarios like this since my early childhood. One of my earliest memories involves witnessing my grandfather pushing my mother during a disagreement. I cannot ascertain who was at fault or the context surrounding that memory, yet its prominence in my recollection is concerning. I cannot discern the truth of the matter. I recognize that every family has its challenges. I understand that there is no such thing as a flawless family. I know my situation isn't uncommon, but is it typical? Is this the norm for the majority of people? I ask sincerely. This does not feel normal, yet I lack any other point of reference. Story 2. Discovered my GF's Wi-Fi was leaching. Set up traps that redirected users to explicit sites. Soon after, neighbors broke up. Hello everyone. To begin with, in my previous post, I made a mistake with my story, and upon reflection, I can agree with the criticism I received. While I understand it may not mean much in the broader context of Reddit, I sincerely apologize for that error and wanted to clarify things. Today, my girlfriend reminded me of this story. Background: after my girlfriend relocated to her new apartment, which is conveniently situated closer to her sister and me, it became essential for her to have internet access. Even though she is not particularly adept with technology, she is knowledgeable about the basics. Therefore, she specifically asked the internet service provider whether she should be concerned about Wi-Fi protection that uses admin credentials. The representative reassured her that everything was secure, right out of the box, and guaranteed there was no admin login. In fact, they claimed that she only needed to press a button to connect her laptop, and her Wi-Fi network would be completely protected. The situation, a few months or possibly years later, my girlfriend began to notice a decline in her internet speed, which became especially noticeable during video calls with her family members in Japan. As I mentioned, she understands basic technology, so she realized the issue might not solely lie with the internet connection itself. It could potentially be her laptop or possibly even the network cables, which could have deteriorated over time. Before reaching out to her internet service provider's support desk, she was determined to explore all possible causes, which is when she asked me for assistance. I have a deep passion for technology and have been working in the field of information and communication technology, ICT, for over 30 years, primarily as a systems administrator, but I have also held positions as an IT manager or co-manager. During that time, I made sure to stay updated with my colleagues and even covered shifts when necessary. So visiting my girlfriend while showcasing my elite IT skills was a thrilling prospect. After some investigation, I discovered the problem: someone was stealing her Wi-Fi. To be fair, the ISP support staff were correct in asserting that this wasn't an issue stemming from admin credentials anymore. It was now entirely randomized. However, there was a catch. On their routers, the Wi-Fi password was actually identical to the Random Service Set Identifier, SSID, also known as the network name. What a mess! I felt a surge of anger toward both this incompetence and the blatant invasion of my girlfriend's privacy. Perhaps my frustration was over the top, but it was justified in my mind. For some individuals, the concern may just be about getting internet access, yet many overlook the fact that such intruders also gain access to your private network. This means they could potentially reach any public Windows or Mac folders that you might have available, not to mention any other devices connected to the network. Thankfully, my girlfriend was somewhat tech-savvy, as mentioned earlier, but I was still furious. The payback, I proposed an idea I had successfully implemented before. Let's replace this inferior router with a professional-grade device. Specifically, I suggested acquiring the same type of Xi XEL router that I use at home to establish a secure virtual private network, VPN, between us and to enjoy additional beneficial features like a private voice over Internet Protocol, VoIP, connection. She agreed, and we proceeded to purchase a new router together. These devices can be quite expensive, similar to a high-end smartphone, so we decided to split the costs, especially since a mid-range model could have sufficed. Although I deem her old router inferior, I must admit it offered useful functionalities, like a system log service. It could also support USB storage, so I enabled Wi-Fi logging, connected a large USB memory stick, and we then awaited the arrival of the new router. Then I got to work. First, I configured my girlfriend with an untraceable Wi-Fi network to keep it hidden from outsiders. Next, we established a far more robust security scheme and then plotted our revenge on the intruders. I created a second Wi-Fi network that mirrored the previous one, but this time I deliberately restricted its bandwidth, ensuring it could not consume the entire internet speed. Following that, I implemented specific domain name system, DNS, overrides. DNS is a vital service on the internet that translates domain names into IP addresses, which are necessary for computers to establish a connection. While users may focus on a site like Reddit.com, all their devices care about are the related IP addresses. The interesting part is that this service can be easily modified, and I had reviewed the logs, pinpointing exactly which websites the intruders frequented the most. From that point, whenever they attempted to access Banca NL through this router, they would be redirected to a rather explicit and illegal adult website. Similarly, BankBNL was rerouted to a dubious, hot scissors, lesbian website. I also noticed that one particular online store was occasionally accessed by the thieves, so I decided to redirect that URL to a relationship counseling site. If you suspect your partner of infidelity, come to us. Around that time, I realized that my girlfriend's router utilized a more advanced firmware than my own. This model also included web redirection features, allowing businesses to reroute specific domains to a local or remote web page. For instance, if a company wanted to block access to social media, they could set the router to redirect Facebook.com to a local page explaining the no social media policy. To my delight, this service also had a randomization feature. I recalled a notorious website from the early days of the internet concerning a goat from Sweden, infamous for its grotesque content. It became a meme due to its shocking nature. I sought out a similar replacement and then happily integrated it into the random redirection service. Therefore, every so often, when the intruders attempted to access their favorite sites, regardless of their choice, they would be met with an utterly revolting image instead. Then we waited. I must clarify that my girlfriend did not entirely approve of some of my actions, especially after learning about the consequences. However, we never argued about it since she comprehended my perspective. Don't mess with my girlfriend. And she acknowledged that if you invade someone's space, even digitally, you relinquish your claim to a civil resolution. Do not provoke a tech enthusiast. The consequences: one day, my girlfriend returned home from work and noticed a large moving truck parked outside. Initially indifferent, she soon realized that one of her neighbors 2 doors down was vacating their apartment. A few days later, she discussed this with her immediate neighbor and discovered that things had completely imploded between them. The shouting and accusations resonated through the walls. Apparently, the couple had severe disagreements regarding their obviously inappropriate selection of websites, and once the confrontation occurred, there was no room left for rational discussion. One individual even accused the other of hacking the internet, claiming the explicit, goat pictures only emerged after the first eruption of arguments. As far as we are aware, they parted ways. For the record, I harbor no regrets. I removed the SSID for evident reasons and reset the DNS and forwarding configurations, restoring normalcy. More importantly, my girlfriend continues to be pleased with the router and its additional features even as I write this. She is advancing her career as a 3D artist, and the assurance that all her projects will remain secure after transferring them to my network attached storage, NAS, is a critical factor for her. It's vital to understand, always keep in mind that when you utilize someone else's internet connection, including free services, you are entirely dependent on their goodwill. Such services can be exploited easily, either through pranks like mine or worse. Imagine if I redirected your banking activities to a counterfeit login page to capture and misuse your personal data. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Edit. Some points raised by others, this incident did not occur 30 years ago, but rather within the last 6. The couple could not have made an innocent mistake. The Wi-Fi names, even if they were the defaults, would have been significantly distinct. For example, ISB 151,413, ISB 201,413, ISB 251,413, etc. Furthermore, unlimited plans are not prevalent in this area, so one way or another, they would have realized they were using next to no data over the duration of this issue. Additionally, their passwords would not have matched my girlfriend's unless, of course, they had the same internet subscription or provider. Regarding the DNS, not Universal Domain Name Service, no, they would not see their bank's URL showing a pornographic website, but merely an IP address at best. As for my lack of concern regarding the outcome, how entitled or unreasonable must you be to blame someone else for visiting a site, only to refuse any rationale and create major drama? Had they both entered the same site, such as the online store, it would have been clear what had transpired. This also ties into the notion of an honest mistake. If it were genuinely a mistake, wouldn't one of them have contacted their ISB to contest their innocence? At the very least, they could have complained about poor service. Instead, they attacked one another. Edit 2. Wow, this post exceeded my expectations. It's grown to a point where I can hardly keep up with the responses. I also forgot to include a summary TLDR. My girlfriend experienced issues with her internet speed. It should have been functioning correctly according to her ISB. I found Wi-Fi intruders, became indignant, and decided to take action. We purchased my girlfriend a new router, while I replicated the old Wi-Fi network but with modifications. 2 sites frequented by the intruders now directed to explicit adult websites, while the last went to a counseling site for when your relationship is in trouble. Several days later, my girlfriend noticed people moving out on her apartment floor. When she inquired with her neighboring tenant, it turned out their neighbors had a significant fallout. My stance remains unchanged. If you're using someone else's internet, the repercussions are your responsibility. I played a prank on them hard, and yet I believe that others might have resorted to far worse actions. Story 3. I quit my pizza job in front of the whole restaurant, then hit my boss with proof he owed me $6K. His face was priceless. OMG. This is a tale of revenge in multiple parts, and I apologize in advance for its length. Approximately 30 years ago, when I was 17, I was getting ready to attend university. An acquaintance from my parents' church recommended a job where I would learn to be a pizza chef. It seemed fantastic. I needed money for my university expenses and had already held numerous jobs, so hard work was nothing new to me, although cooking was definitely new territory. My only experience with Italian cuisine was at a Pizza Hut, so I acknowledged that in the beginning, my presence was more of a hindrance than a help. I began by working for free. That was fine, but when 3 months had passed and I was opening the restaurant by myself and taking full shifts alone, it was clear that I deserved to be compensated. With all the courage I could muster at 17, I confronted the owner, whom I will refer to as Nick. He complained and tried to belittle my abilities, but I maintained my stance. Eventually, I secured a minimum wage, which at that time seemed reasonable to me. I continued to work there for another 3 years, juggling around 30 hours of classes per week at university, 30 hours at the restaurant, and another 30 for studying. It was a hectic schedule, but I eventually got used to it. Towards the end of my tenure there, I became much more knowledgeable regarding labor laws. I started keeping track of my pay stubs and end-of-year tax documents and realized that Nick and his co-owners were shortchanging me. I was not receiving the correct pay rate, they were miscalculating tax deductions, and there were numerous other accounting discrepancies. By that time, I was working alongside a colleague who I will refer to as Friend. It was a busy Sunday night. The restaurant was packed. Friend and I were energized, handling a multitude of orders while also working our new boss, whom I will call New Boss. He had just joined the establishment and seemed to think he had become some kind of royalty merely because he was now a so-called restaurateur. After enduring years of late-night cooking for the boss's friends during World Cup nights or holidays, I had grown somewhat accustomed to this type of boasting. On that particular evening, New Boss would not allow me to operate the lower tier of the second pizza oven because it supposedly cost too much. Here I was, with one oven completely filled, both of us working at full capacity, yet we still fell behind because one oven simply wasn't sufficient. It was also starting to cool down due to constant openings. New Boss had a couple of his friends at the table. Rather than simply requesting us to prepare some complimentary garlic bread or something similar, he took it upon himself to load trays and place them in the oven. While not the worst offense, he had no idea what he was doing. Every 30 seconds, he would open the door to check the bread, which further cooled the oven, risking the food we were already preparing and significantly delaying our workflow. I had the head chef yelling at me because, although his dishes were ready to go, my pizzas on the same orders were not. It was chaotic and unpleasant. This garlic bread bandit nonsense needed to end. Me, New Boss, please stop messing with my oven. If you want garlic bread, just ask and I'll take care of it immediately. New Boss. What? Huh. Me. You are causing the oven's temperature to drop, and we are too busy for this. Just let me know and I'll make it for you. New Boss. Okay. Did he comply? No, he continued his interference. The same conversation played out another 2 times, culminating in my warning that I would lose my temper if he disrupted my work again. You can probably see where this is heading. He did it once more. After consistently feeling undervalued and mistreated for those 3 years, my time there had finally reached its conclusion, and I decided to take action. I looked at Friend and said, "Are we done here?" He responded with a simple, "Yes." We took off our aprons, and in front of the entire restaurant where the pizza kitchen was clearly visible, we threw them down on the counter and announced to New Boss, "We are quitting. All these tickets, all the food you've messed with, and your friend's garlic bread, it's all yours now. Good luck." With that, we exited, got coffees from the baristas, and sat in front of the pizza area to watch him flounder. He had no clue what he was doing, and there was literally no one available to assist him. We could see dishes exiting the kitchen, but the pizzas for those same orders were delayed by 20 minutes or more, with tables growing increasingly agitated. I admit it was a bit cruel, but utterly satisfying to witness. However, that was not the true revenge. The real retribution came from the fact that I had been secretly photocopying my timesheets every Sunday night and replacing them with blank ones the following morning. I had been doing this for over a year and had advised Friend to do the same. On the following Monday, I entered the restaurant to find Nick there, furious at my presence. As I walked in, his face turned bright red and he shouted across the restaurant floor, "What do you think you are doing here? Get out and don't ever return." Me, Nick, we need to have a discussion. We can do it here or in your office, but trust me, you will want this conversation to be private. Nick, fine. Follow me. He desperately attempted to reassert his authority and stormed off to his little office at the back. Once there, he began rattling off threats about withholding pay and a series of other illegal bluster. Me, are you finished? Good. Here, read this. I presented him with a printout of a spreadsheet and a collection of photocopied timesheets, pay slips, and printed copies of wage regulations, detailing just how much he had shortchanged me. Me, you owe me $6,000. I will accept cash or a check now. Did I mention that he and the other bosses had just been raided by the tax office? Their business was on shaky ground. The timing for Nick was poor indeed. Nick stammering, wringing his hands. "But I can't afford that. Look, I'll show you my bank statements," as he scrambled to locate his financial documents. Me, Nick, I really don't care about your financial situation. You owe me $6,000 today, or I will report this to the tax office and all relevant government agencies that would be very interested in this matter. If you are doing this to me, there's a good chance you're doing it to other staff too. As for your claims of not having the funds, that's not my concern. However, since you just purchased a new $60,000 Pajero, if you have to take it to the dealership and sell it, I still don't care, but I expect that $6,000 today." I witnessed him tear up slightly, not sure whether it was from frustration, anger, or realizing he had underestimated me. But witnessing a grown man who had mistreated me for years become emotional at my hands was quite a striking moment as a 20-year-old. That day, I received a check for the entire $6,000, and yes, it was honored. The highlight came when I left his office, and friends stood there, looking Nick straight in the eyes and stating, "Nick, we need to talk," before walking in to address similar issues. He lost a total of $10,000 that day. The cherry on top, a few of my friends at the restaurant caught wind of my confrontation and expressed their interest in what had transpired. I informed them how they were being cheated and advised them on how to keep copies of their timesheets and where to find the pertinent laws. I know that several others subsequently took similar action against him, and that was how I exited the hospitality industry and began working in my chosen field without any intention of returning. I hope you enjoyed my gift to you on my cake day.